Welcome to the David Clewell Visiting Writers Series reading with Sue Cho. I want to thank the donors to the David Clewell Fund for making these readings possible, and also to the Webster University Speakers Committee. I'm Elizabeth Hoover, and I'm going to be introducing our reader, Sue Cho, who will read for about 35 minutes. We'll move into a Q&A, so get your gears turning, and then there'll be a book signing. And I think we should try to sell out these books, y'all. All right, excellent. In the opening lines of her debut collection, The Symmetry of Fish, Sue Cho instructs the readers how to pronounce the Korean word for water. Pucker your lips like a fish, your tongue a cautious eel, pushing its head to the roof of your mouth. Every time I read that stanza, I can't help but try to do it, even though the characters won't give their sounds up to me as a monolinguistic reader. Being monolinguistic, meaning we only speak and read in one language, we must remember is very rare when we consider the rest of the world. When I read this stanza, Cho reminds me that words are physical. Words are things. They are sounds, visual units. They have weight and gravity. And like eels, they migrate, slip in and out of currents from salt to fresh as they change their physical space, spawn, and gather. The weight that I feel as I struggle to follow Cho's direction comes from history and memory, how they tether her to the country of her birth and resonate with complexity as they change contexts, opening up hilarious conversations about the difference between love and wisdom teeth, or opening up meditations on the nature of caretaking. But they also tether her to the present, the language barrier between her and her partner in poems like Thorn, Splinter, Fishbone is actually a site of play, connection, sharing, and explanation. Here we are, she joyfully declares, mouth dripping with sun gold kiwi. Yes, it's true that language in the United States is also weaponized, made into institutional barriers, and wears people down in microaggressions like a DJ saying chow instead of cho, or being dismissed from math to be, quote, taught the differences between English and English at home, or shamed for an unrolled R. In the poem, Hello, my parents don't speak English well, how can I help you? The speaker talks for her mother about how we just want some accountability. This book shows us how we can play, love, and both hold on to and share what makes us who we are and who we are becoming while waiting for that accountability, which might never come. Please join me in welcoming Sue Cho.
All right. Everyone hear me okay? All right. I've never been to a reading where there had to be more chairs put out, so wow. I'm just gonna stand here for 30 minutes, I guess. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm gonna start my timer because I could just talk forever and actually not read poems. Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I want it printed out, and I'm really glad Dr. Hoover, right? Or as you may know her as Elizabeth, talked about how to say water, because I remember we were in the same poetry workshop, right? And Elizabeth had brought in these like wonderful card catalog poems, which are in this book, if you haven't seen it already, which is a beautiful book. And it just was a nice reminder that things that happen in your class here, right? When, you know, in undergrad, graduate school, whatever, those are all conversations that really matter, like to your future as like a writer, whether you write, you know, your feelings in the notes app of your phone, which I pretty much started writing because I was doing the equivalent of that when I was in high school, or whether, you know, you want to be a writer and you're writing poems and you take it very seriously, like wherever you are on that spectrum, I think, you know, it's the people around you that really matter, right? And so, oh, I feel like I have to be really serious now. I was gonna read my fun, like going out poems. I'm like, I'll read my serious poems first. How's that sound? And then we'll loosen up. So yeah, have those snacks. Don't hesitate if you need more snacks while I read to get up. I respect it. And I have a clear view of this like little harvest display. So if I just zone out, it's because I see like pumpkins and like corn husks. It's all very appealing to me. And so as a way of introducing myself, since at the class I visited, we kind of talked about essays and poems and kind of like the journey of finding your writerly self. I wanted to read like the first like very short paragraphs of an essay I wrote, which Lit Hub calls Sue Cho on Beginning Her Poetic Journey, which is not the title I asked for. That's the title they gave it. The title I wanted was Notes on Beginning Again. And so that's a subtitle on this. So I'm gonna read it. It's dedicated for my first poetry teacher. Her name is Molly Brodak. Okay, Notes on Beginning Again. I never intended to become a poet. It's just that I was addicted to feeling things strongly and then nothing at all. Though it would take me a long time to realize this. When I think about writing The Cemetery of Fish, all I can see are the bursts of passion strung along between all that I didn't and still don't know how to feel. I think about my early teachers and feel compelled to apologize. I wish I could shake my old self awake sooner. Here are some things I am sure of. Language begins in my body, my chest, my toes, and travels to my mouth. Language is a bodily act. Memories are fraught. We add embellishments in our writing, little signals so we can more accurately convey the emotions we wanted to preserve. These embellishments feel like skeuomorphs we hoard and pack into our words so we can try to feel them later. Yeah, I always say for a poet, I hate feelings. And here I am writing poetry about them. All right. So yeah, how many of you would say you have access to like a different language? Okay, how many of you would say like you are around people who have access to a different language? How many of you would say you like have been around different dialects of English? Yeah, okay. So I think all of those things count as being fluent in other languages, right? It's all sound-based. And so I'm currently in South Carolina right now. I live in a kind of rural part. I've never really spent time in the real South. I went to Emory, but that was in Atlanta, and that doesn't really count. And these plumbers came to help with the place we were renting from, because all the toilets were busted. And we could not understand a single word he was saying to us, even though, he's speaking English. And he clearly knew like we were from the region, and he just looked at us in the eye and said really slowly, like, your toilet is a piece of shit. And so I think that's like a really intimate moment of language, right? And trying to communicate with other people. I don't know. So if you've ever had a handyman come, can understand him and tells you your toilet's a piece of shit, I think you can write a poem about that. And I think it'd be a great one. Okay, I'm gonna stop laughing. I'll read some poems. How to say water. Pucker your lips like a fish, your tongue a cautious eel pushing its head to the roof of your mouth. Breathe through your nose as you practice the silence of this exercise. Don't bite yourself, trying to make water with sounds of agreement from your chest. Yes, that simultaneously creates a small gap between those tense lips. Tilt your head back, a finger on your throat. Please, start from the top and try to follow along. I wish you could borrow my body to say water. This is the easiest way I can help you say mur, because I can never help my parents say girl, ice cream, parfait. Oh, you can hear that. Those are my elbows. Okay. Hashi, noun, thorn, splinter, fishbone. Home for a pan-fried mackerel dinner, my mother watches my chopsticks stumble around the kashi. I am full after a few bites, and I remember a story. When I was a baby, I choked on kashi at my grandparents' house. My dad wasn't there. They yelled at her for not inspecting each flaky bit of fish I put in my clumsy mouth, not teaching me the maneuvering of spiky slivers with my tongue, how to place the needles next to my plate, extract white meat clean. Since then, she peels and holds skeletons above our meal, fossils before me. Still, I am bad at peeling bone from fish, skin from pears. If you can't peel the skin of a pear in a thin spiral with a fruit knife, you can't get married. You can have nothing if you can't offer a man fruit. My mouth dripping with sun gold kiwi, I tell my love these stories laughing, here we are. Me spooning the yellow center into my mouth, cupping the furry layer in my palm, him standing over the sink, sinking his teeth into the skin. What would my mother say? Once, a splinter burrowed into the meat of my thumb, and I kept it there for weeks. Told my parents the splinter came out on its own, while I hoped my body would absorb the slender spear and disappear the kashi painlessly. And so throughout this book, if you've looked through it, I used Korean in here, and it was, I remember I would get a lot of questions like, oh, what's your organizational principle for this? How did you decide what to put in Korean and not? How did you decide like what to translate and what to not? And I realized I didn't have like a good answer until I realized that there was a governing principle behind it. And that one was more of my personal memories. And I realized every time, I don't know about you all, but when you try to write a poem that's kind of rooted in your own memories, you want it to be a little realistic, right? And you want to do justice toward, whatever you're writing about. And I realized nothing felt true to me until I told myself and was okay with admitting the fact that I realized those memories were in Korean and not in English, because I still speak Korean at home. I don't really talk in English to my parents, even though now obviously their English is much better. It's so awkward. It feels like I'm crossing like a boundary line, and I'm like, oh, but that creates a problem because whenever I speak in Korean, I feel like a child again, right? I always have the Korean of a very fancy third grader, and now I would say fancy first grader. And so I think I just had to the repetition of the word in the book was for me kind of like an anchor point, kind of like reminding me that these sounds exist, even if it doesn't make sense necessarily for other people. Yeah. So this one is titled Palm, and this it's on page 15. I just heard paper. I was like, it's on page 15. In this poem, I tell my students, and every time I read it, this poem took me like 10 years to get to this version. This was one of the first poems I tried to write about when I was an undergrad, and it was really bad. I'm not saying that to be humble. Like the professor and everyone in workshop was like, what the, this just doesn't make sense. They're like, your syntax is all wrong. And I wrote versions of this poem, every other year for 10 years. And what unlocked it for me was using the word palm, right? Which is a poet's dream, because as you can tell from the title, verb to give death. And I was like, nice, and a noun, it's chestnut night. All right, palm. I clung to my grandfather's back like a beetle on a sesame leaf every time he leapt over chasms to take me mountain raspberry hunting. He hit trees with a long wooden rod, and chestnuts fell from the sky. His palms broke the spindly shields when knives couldn't split the burr. Once, we picked out the prettiest chicken, and the strangled squawks bubbled into the best chicken porridge I've ever had. A trellis of buzzing flypaper always smacked his forehead, and he never flinched. Tombstones lined the terrace hills next to fields of soybeans and tobacco. Is there no magic from my mouth when I say that my grandfather is dead, that I still don't really care? My mouth dressed in fried breadcrumbs, like the fish on the table, a low escaping my lips, curling over my teeth to say palm. And later during the Q&A, if you want to ask me, do you really not care that your grandfather is dead? Please feel free to ask. I like answering it. I'm not going to tell you now. All right. Yeah. Let's see how I'm doing on my time. Wow, this is really simple. It's only been 11 minutes and 5 seconds. Oh, okay. I'm going to take my time. How are people feeling today? Feeling okay? All right, good. Okay. If you're bored, just let me know. I'll read something semi-funny. But people say if I try to write something funny, it's like the most depressing poem I ever wrote. And so here's a poem I try to be funny about, but it's not. But I think it's a love poem. It's called We Are All Dying Slowly, which is true. I try to read this poem. This is one of the few poems in this book that wasn't published before my book came out. And I would make myself read it at readings, and I couldn't get through it because I felt emotional. So I'm a sick person, and so I make myself read it first at every reading I did until I could do it. I'm chill now. It's okay. All right, we are all dying slowly. My grandmother drapes a blanket around a mahogany picture frame of my grandfather who died decades ago, but she is so happy he's home. So happy that she pinches my aunt's arms for not greeting him properly, as if he has stepped out of the frame and as if he is simply sleeping on the couch, farting up a storm, making all of us skitter away, pinching our noses. My grandmother is back on her homemade yogurt kick because he likes it. Later, there's a baby blue bedtime hat to keep his head warm, to make sure they live a long life together. But when he stops talking, she wonders why he's mad, but it's okay, because they are in love again. And even when my aunts remove all the framed pictures in the house, my grandmother calls my mother to exclaim that Sue visited. How surprising. So happy, because I too haven't been back in a decade, too busy living in the USA. I am on the phone, pacing away from my parents. I say, I'm glad she was happy. And when I say bye in English, she laughs, thank you very much. And my grandmother knows I wasn't really there. But later, the big family portrait from when I was 10, my dad and uncle photoshopped in, my grandparents sitting on regal chairs in the center, the many, many cousins I don't talk to anymore surrounding them, that portrait has been taken away from my grandmother's apartment. I say to my mother, we were all so little, so beautiful. And maybe they should put the picture back on her mantle because she will have so much company, be busy for a long time, busy making yogurt, calling every one of us to say how delightful her day was when we visited, laughing, thank you, thank you. That's what happens when you try to write a funny poem. So beware. All right. Oh, it's too serious. Okay. How many of you have been to a bar called Brothers? They're usually on college campuses. I know. Dr. Hoover has, because we went to the same program. She was there before I was. Nobody? It's like all big Midwestern, I think, colleges have one. Like Kilroy's is one. I don't know. I'm from the Midwest, so those are the ones. Does anyone know what a drink called the AMF is? Okay. It's bright blue. It comes in a pitcher, and it stands for adios, motherfucker. Okay. All right. Yes. When I was in college, I grew up really strict, in a strict household. And I was too scared if I had a sip of alcohol before I turned 21 that God would kill me. So I waited until grad school to like even do anything remotely fun. Anyway, this is, a poem. I'm gonna read some poems about friends, important friends who are important to my writing. It's called Mug Club because you could join their Mug Club for like 25 cents. All right, Mug Club for Maggie, Scott, and Anthony. Anthony's my fiance now. On Tuesday nights, we meet up brothers for pulled porks, AMS, and discounted wings, all salt, no punch. We discuss how our exes are vectors, how we are their origin points. We insert ourselves into a boring formula to calculate how far these exes will land away from us, the time it takes them to spiral back after stalling at their peak. After another round, we joke how we exist inside this self-made centrifugal force, what tethers us to the fear of losing momentum, that this spinning constant will halt. Ergonomics for Maggie. If I told you I thought carpal tunnel was carpool tunnel, you would laugh. I thought that's what I was like 23, so, you know. All right, I'm gonna start over again. If I told you I thought carpal tunnel was carpool tunnel, you would laugh. But who wouldn't want to be stuck inside a 97 town and country, hurtling through a tunnel, detachable seats gone, sitting cross-legged in a circle linking arms, swaying with the curves of the road. After an hour, you realize no one is driving, and that there are some things we still don't understand. How some parts of the lake are easier to paddle through, how a turtle at the bottom of shallow water looks so far away, why it's worse to grocery shop sad than hungry, how lifting a leather couch up a flight of wooden stairs feels as easy as a pack of spirits on the cramped, unpainted porch, overlooking the same strangers walking and biking, how some don't understand that we could miss people next to us, how space disappears by sitting with someone in a car, not saying anything, because when we step too close to bliss, our bodies stop to wonder if they have to jumpstart our atoms again. These are my emo poems. I'll read another like emo poem. These are really early poems I wrote. And this is this like recorded on Zoom or is it just streaming on Zoom? It's recording? Okay. It's called Open Discectomy. That's all I'll say then. Yeah. It's not that deep, is it? Carry him on your shoulders. Set him face down so he is numb and sterilized by stone. No anesthesia or metal trays of scalpel and clamps. Just your hands and a zipper to fasten on the back of his neck with their nails. Cut a place to line the zip down the center of his shoulder blades. Grip one in place before ripping the metal down. Skin will snag between the teeth, but keep going until you hit the tailbone. Elbows out, pull his back apart until you see traces of this bone. Gently stomp on the neck until you hear a dull crack with both hands. Lift the spine like bones of mackerel. Drag it out. It is heavier than you imagined. Ice your hands in the snow. Fill the cavity up with snow. Fill it with bags of rose potpourri from your back pocket. Finally, undress yourself and lie inside the swoon, crossing your ankles, twisting on your side, zipping yourself inside the body, the only way you know how to fix him. Now, as all the young people say, this was my I can fix him era or whatever. I don't think I've ever read that at a reading out loud because it's like embarrassing, but it was like a little Easter egg for myself. Like no one will know what it's about. Neither will you, since this is recorded forever. All right. And, you know, to get back about language, I don't know. When I want to sound really impressive, I'll tell an audience a question I get all the time. I'm sorry, now I'm just preemptively answering your questions all the time is, well, how do you know what word you want to use in Korean? How do you know, like, how did you decide like what to talk about that triggers this for you? Or how did you even come up with this? And for me, I didn't really talk to my mom much on the phone till I got to grad school. We had some issues. And then I think when I got to grad school and started getting validated for my poems and the career path I chose, I like became an adult, right? In her eyes. And she would call me all the time. By all the time, like once a month was a lot for me. And the older you get, you start talking about more adult things. And I didn't have the language for it. But I remember I was trying to say something. I don't remember what. I could lie to you and just make something up, but I won't lie today. And I couldn't remember the word for it. And so I just opened my mouth and I was like, it sounds something like this. And I would say it. She'd be like, you mean this? I'm like, no. And I would just kind of like sound the word out because I know how long it is. I know how many syllables it is. I know the general shape. I mean, I would land on it. And she'd be like, oh, you mean that? And I was like, yes. And sometimes I'll do that, and I'll just remember the word, even though I don't ever remember like knowing the word. It's not because I'm a genius. It's because our body, just like it remembers horrible things, it will remember sounds for you. And I think there's a lot to be said. What is the thing I always say that sounds smart? Oh yeah, we can trust our chest to remember, right? Your body will always remember for you. Maybe not when you're sitting down, like all of you will do after this reading and try to write a poem about sound, but it'll come to you, I promise. I was gonna read this one. And this poem is kind of generated from that thought. 사랑니, noun, wisdom teeth. The dentist says I only have 2 wisdom teeth, which are sleeping sideways and will probably never move. I tell my parents this and point to the back of my mouth. After thinking all my molars were dead, they smile, exclaiming that it's time to get my 사랑니 out. I point again to my wisdom teeth because harang means love, not wisdom, in case they take the wrong ones out. It takes a whole car ride back to settle on the fact that wisdom teeth are love teeth. I ask why. They shrug and say that's how it is. Like the time Stacy had a sleepover, we all talked about the garden snails in her fish tank and later whispered how we put them in Stacy's pillow. After our mothers came to get us past midnight, we tried to explain why we hadn't realized that Chihe had feelings. I wondered if anyone else found it funny that our moms were asking us to consider wisdom's feelings. And Chihe is a Korean name, and it kind of means wisdom. No. I feel bad for Stacy. I don't know, I thought it was pretty funny. We didn't do it. We were too scared to touch the snails. Kids are stupid. Bongsunga, noun, garden balsams, touch me nuts. The last time I came back from Korea was with fingernails stained orange, scarlet, my lunulae still visible and sinking behind my cuticles. I hoped no one would notice at school, but they kept asking, so I answered with flowers, Korean nail polish. I am glad for keeping this inconsequential secret because my grandma and I were walking back to our apartment complex named Sunshine Village. She pointed to a flower bush tucked behind green fences and ordered me to grab as many as I could. When my small hands fumbled, she pushed me aside and did it herself, instructing me to keep an eye on the security man's booth because he gave her a warning last time. I don't want to explain the crushed petals, saran wrap, her spit on my nails. This is when I learned I like to take things not for sale. There was no wisdom or love when my grandma pressed the sweet mixture against fingertips. Only sit still, don't touch anything. Hours later, she held my hands to the light, making sure the sunset stain would last all the way back as she squeezed my saran-wrapped fingertips, stamping me with her tojang. All right. I'm gonna check the time. 24 minutes. Is it okay if I read for like 10 more minutes? Okay. I'm sorry if you don't want me to keep going, but other people said yes. Yeah. I need to awkwardly take a sip of water. Yeah, I grew up in Indiana. It was great. I don't know why that sounded sarcastic. It was great. That was my poor transition into this poem. My bed shakes and I assume the ghosts are finally getting me for Kia. But it's just an earthquake in Indiana. I like to tell the story because it reminds me of you. We first met in high school summer gym class where we turned jeans into flotation devices and tallied bowling scores by hand. We got close in AP English when we admitted that we read Jane Eyre in one evening, how we loved the teacher's tape recording of Macbeth because we really didn't understand what was supposed to be funny. Back then, we wanted to be rappers or doctors and now benevolent EDM DJs in Vegas. It's true. We love to chug coffee past 11 p.m. so we can shit a final time before a night of dancing and waddling through snow in high heels we bought after we broke up with our boyfriends. The older we get, we are always late. Like to the Odessa concert you won radio tickets to, how we shivered underneath big blankets covered in dog hair, the outfits we picked out months ago, never seen in blurry pictures. I am writing all this to get to what I really want to say. You are the most faithful person I know. You believe in prayer because you believe in ghosts, in vengeful spirits because you've seen them. Once, you asked me if I thought you were silly for being so superstitious, and I said no. I pray when I am scared. The only time I take in Jesus' name, I pray seriously. Me trusting my math, and you, for good measure, hanging a picture of Jesus above the bed, a crucifix, and even a Bible on your nightstand, even though we both don't read it anymore. Here, I try to conjure images or metaphors of ourselves, but I can only remember the things we say to each other. Isn't it funny how every Asian girl we know is engaged or about to be engaged to a white boy? Or now we know not to trust white moms from Carmel because they voted for Trump. Or we'd rather them smile at us while keeping their hate to themselves. Or isn't it funny we don't go out anymore? Or this is better than the drunk white boys who follow us to the car all the time. Or after midnight. Or our mother's this, our mother's that. Or thank you for laughing. I think it's a funny poem. All right. Speaking of funny, how many of you grew up in a religious setting? Or like went to, okay, ooh, okay. I'm gonna read this poem. I did too. Yes, I have thoughts. But I still respect it. Ode to wanting to run over other people's children in the church parking lot. We can all relate, at least half this room. Yeah, I realized that when I was like, I wasn't worried. Everyone's like, oh, were you nervous about your family, like seeing the poems in the book? I was like, no. And then I forgot about this poem. My sister's 11 years younger than I am. She's a junior in college right now. And I was like, should I keep it in? And she's like, who cares? Like, no, she's like, people will think it's funny. And I was like, no one said anything to me. And my dad bought my books and like passed it out to people. No one said anything to me. So I think everyone feels this way. Okay. Ode to wanting to run over other people's children in the church parking lot. My sister is confused. Wants a cell phone, a Chanel bag, an iPad, tickets to the governor's ball. The list grows every Sunday. Crying, perplexed by wants she didn't know she wanted. I tease her about how she's only 8, but she is betrayed, says I don't get it. I tell my mom Michelle is going crazy here. We walk to the van, all smiles and bows, to the church people saying that us country folk from Indiana will get used to the city soon. I have already downloaded pictures of the red brick house on a hill for a Sunday like this. I show my mom these pictures as we wait for Michelle's friends to charm everyone with respectful goodbyes. I say loud enough for Michelle to hear that we could just run them over. I can't stop laughing because I know they know that make it better. It's not the most poetic ending, but you know what? I thought it was funny. All right. Yeah, I'll read 2 more. Okay. So for all you like religious-y people or else grew up that way, how many of you went to church on New Year's Eve or have been? Raise your hands high. I'm so curious. A few. Okay. I did this for like the first like 22 years of my life. And I was like, I should write a poem about it. New Year's on Rockland Avenue. The pastor stops his sermon to start the countdown. This year, God can wait 10 seconds to finish. We've already lined up at 10 p.m., somber for the bread and blood, stifling our laughs at the sincerity of it all. I've curled my sister's hair, highlighted her cheekbones, put on our sparkly heels, post selfies, even with our brother. Our friends ask where we're going. When we say church, no one believes us. We're surrounded by Korean banners declaring peace on earth, a Christmas tree, a nativity scene. We send snaps to our friends, each of us captioning pictures with the best Jesus jokes. We shake everyone's hands, glad for the booming echoes of Korean. We forget how to say Happy New Year, so my sister exclaims Happy Birthday instead. We don't have a family tradition, but we do this every year, even through my mother's lamentations that her children are straying further from God. But when I'm home, my sister still asks if I believe in everything we grew up with, and I say, yes, I do. I believe in grandmothers and crystal pinks dropping daisies on the top of my hand on New Year's Eve, after everyone has prayed for a year's worth of good blessings. I believe in a patch of grass turning into a volleyball court, where it's filled with flittering girls, making flower chains long as a jump rope, asking me to try. When it breaks, they laugh and make another. Dutifully munching on Costco cookies in the church cafeteria after midnight, when our parents tell us that it's our turn, we find our brother to tell him it's time to get our blessings. We lumber up the red carpet, steps to the stage, kneel, wait for the pastor to say our names with conviction and his hand on our heads, asking God for a litany of things our parents wrote on a piece of soft paper. Thank you for being such a good audience. Okay, when you're the pastor change and the guy who was there before, it's not like they're gonna see this thing, you know. He was, I liked him, you know, he was old and had that, you know, nice vibe. This new person, even though we've been there for like 4 years, one New Year, he like forgot our names. I was like, dude, that's so rude. And we were like, and we were all just like silently there, like pausing till he like, nobody helped him out in my family. We're like, let's see how long it takes. He got to it eventually. Respect to that man. Okay. Yeah. You read the last poem of my book, Another Door to the Moon. Every time I see something cool and point it out to someone, it sneaks behind a building, shrinks itself, camera shy, so I will capture it here. The perfect crescent of the first clipped nails stained orange from peeling tangerines while we watch TV again, held each other again. Having not gone outside, we wonder what the moon looks like today. But don't bother peeking out the blinds because it's always the same. Instead, I tell you about a childhood song about the night sky, how my face is round and big like the moon, but the only Korean word I can remember is the word for egg, for daughter, 달걀 and 딸. When the word is so simple, I forgot about it entirely and instead think door, which is moon, which yes, sounds like moon. And I finally whispered to you 달, and there it is. There's the 달. Thank you all so much. All right. So, now it's time for questions. Feel free to like gather your thoughts while I undo this timer. I always like to call Q&A time like questions and or curiosities. If you're curious about something, don't be shy. Yes.
So you mentioned that a lot of the poems in your book, Symmetry of Fish, were published before.
Yeah.
So when you're going through the like writing these poems, was like, is Symmetry of Fish like, oh, I can't wait to put these in my book, I'm gonna call Symmetry of Fish? Or like, when did that put them all together? I mean, not like, I mean, books of poetry are a thing that happen, but when did Symmetry of Fish start thinking of these poems?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I wish I was strategic like that, like how you mentioned, but that was not the case. And I think the symptom of this, most of these poems most of these poems were published before this book came out, was just a symptom of that. It took a long time for a book to happen, right? Like the oldest poem in here, or like the oldest, no, I put one in here. In the middle of the garden, there's a highway. I think that's the one of 2 poems I wrote in undergrad, and they're pretty much the same. I think you can tell. Now I just outed myself, right? But when it started becoming the Symmetry of Fish in my head was when I was like, okay, I've been in 2 degree programs. I've been in grad school for like 6+ years. Like, I'm not that much of a genius. Like no one's knocking on my door, be like, please let me put your poems into a book. It doesn't happen that way, right? And so I started looking for ways to put it together. And I wanted it to be more specific than just, these are my poems about me, even though they kind of are. And I think what unlocked it for me when it like actually felt like it could be a book in my head was when the language stuff came through. And that took me a long time. I know there are very like nice pithy ways to talk about it. Like I could talk about it, but it was like a horrible process. It was like agonizing. It took me years. And I know years feel like a long time when you're an undergrad, you know. But now it feels like that was like 2 seconds. So yeah, the book definitely came after I had enough poems to think about. And I know my book is a little shorter than most poetry books, to the point where I was like, there are page minimums when you submit books for contests. I was sitting there like I was in college trying to make my pages a little longer, but it was undercount, and I was like, whatever, if they don't like it, they don't like it. And it worked out okay. But yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
How many times do you typically revise?
A lot. So for me, revision, sometimes not every poem requires like an overhaul revision, you know, and like your professors are like, and then what? You know, I don't think the poem's there yet. I think this line is actually the beginning, and you're like, excuse me, that's like my second to last line, you know, and that's a comment I give my students a lot. I'm projecting right now. And so some revisions are like that. Some are just me fine tuning things. And so I would say, I'm just looking through the table of contents. Each poem, except for maybe like one. So the one I read, My Bed Shakes and I Assume the Ghosts Are Finally Getting Me, that is pretty much one of the only poems in here that the way it went from my head to the page, it pretty much stayed exactly how it was. And that was probably the only poem I wrote like quickly, even though it was mulling in my head for a long time. And so I think my revision process has changed. I like to hold things in my head more, which I did not understand when I was a student. Even in grad school, I thought all these writers and professors were like BSing me, you know? Like, oh, I'm so smart. I just think about it in my head and they live there. But now I understand what they're saying. But yes, from when I wrote it to like, if it did get picked up for publications singularly, there would be at least like 2-3 years in between. Yeah, a long time. I know it's not very hopeful, but it's good if things take a long time, you know? Yeah. Yes. And then you. Yeah.
So one of the things that and you're not there to this point, but I wonder.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't do my little spiel before it. I was like, let's see. Yeah, my grandma, this is my mom's mom. She visited us. They rarely visit because they're old and it's hard for them to make a long trip. But she was supposed to stay with us for like 3 months. I mean, I was in grad school by then. And all of a sudden she was like, we have to go on a cruise. We have to go on a cruise. And we're like, what? We've never been on a cruise. Like, what are you talking about? And then my parents spent a lot of money to like take us all on this cruise. I mean, it was great. Never been on like vacation like that before. Anyway, and then she was like, why did you take me on this cruise? And then she started accusing people stealing things from her room when we got back. And turns out she was in the early stages of having Alzheimer's. And yeah, and I was thinking about it. I don't talk to my parents about these kinds of things, but yeah. And so there'd be pictures, like family pictures, and she would think that we were there or that my grandpa was back. But I think she knew, but she didn't. But she's doing much better now. Yeah. She started attending this like day school for elderly people with Alzheimer's, where they like go to school, and apparently she like freaking loves it. And now like church can't even get in the way of doing that. And so that's good. Yeah. But that's why. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I write really narrative poems. And my jokey answer would be that it's because I can't write a more lyric poem. I think your professor Elizabeth does a really good job of writing in the in-between and the lyric. Whereas I can't do it. I've tried and it just sounds like really bad, like song lyrics, for me. But I think I'm really drawn to the narrative because a lot of these stories in here, I'm not going to tell you which, it's a conglomeration of like a lot of things that happen, and I was trying to put them in a timeline for myself. And so I really like for me, it just feels more natural to tell it in like a pseudo story, rather than trying to like go above it. Because for me, I like to exist in the narrative. It's very comfortable, for me. And now as I'm talking, I'm like, why can't I write more lyric? I do not know. But but yeah, I just love more narrative poems. Yeah. That's me. A little boring. I'm kidding. I'm not boring. Yes.
I was wondering, like, did you have to consciously work against like taking on the burden of the competition, like writing for like white audiences, like
yeah.
Give up around their experiences, like about the words. Is it a conscious process to fight against that?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Because when you're in a poetry workshop, and I'm getting excited. It's mostly white. And kind of like what Elizabeth was saying in the intro, most people are monolingual. And then there would be some people in workshop would get really hung up on like the logistics of the poem, which often for writers of color is a cop out for actually just complaining about the poem, that it wasn't accessible. And so I remember like it really pissed me off like at a point in my life. And then I wrote these like angrier poems, and I have some abecedarians in here. I did not read them because I read them a little too much. But those, I was like, okay, let me spell it out for you then, right? And I don't consider it like the abecedarian for ESL in West Lafayette, Indiana. That's like one of my favorite poems, or it was like anthologized. It's very cool. But I don't consider that to be like my best poem, not at all. That was my like annoyed, pissed off, like, all right, like A is for, but obviously like it resonated with people, I think, who felt similar frustrations. And I think when you're incorporating like other modes or like any kind of like hybrid text, I like to think about my language as a more like, or using language in the book as like a hybrid art object that is in here that the reader can't, I'm sure like if y'all flip through my book, you have to look at it and like actually like have a thought like, ew, or wow, that's so cool, or like, what is this? How do I look this up? And you flip the page. And I really like finding ways in my poems to kind of confront the reader in that way where you can't really anywhere else, or because I'm scared all the time. But yeah, it was really, it took a long time to kind of get over it. And I think even after this book, there are new questions and concerns that come up. It's like an evolved problem, it doesn't end, but I think that's where I'm not saying I'm like that innovative, but that's where innovation happens, and that's where genres change. So I think it's really exciting. Yeah, see, that's my positive twist at the end. Yeah, we have time. Yes. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Excellent question. Hold on, let me flip through the poem second. When I look at it, I remember better. So for this one, I think how I knew it was done was I kept trying to like describe my grandfather's funeral, which I wasn't there for, because growing up, my parents could only afford to like take themselves. I haven't been back since I was in like middle school, because they'd be like, pick one sibling. Usually the youngest person, the ones who could stay at home, we just stayed home. My parents are going right now, and I was like, I still haven't been back. But all that to say, my early drafts of the poems, I was imagining it, and I was just trying to like imagine this funeral, and like that's they're like country folk. That's all the poem was. That was the scope of the poem, and it was very narrow. And I was trying to be really imagistic perhaps less narrative, right? And I knew it wasn't working because it didn't make sense. The speaker of the poem did not make sense. And what clicked for me was like, why do I care about this? Like, why am I obsessed with trying to paint a picture of something I was not there for? And then I realized the line, is there no magic from my mouth when I say that my grandfather is dead, that I still don't really care? That was like one of the last things I put in the poem, because I realized that was the thing I was skirting around the whole time. And then once I put it in, I was like, this is the complexity that I think I was avoiding putting on the page. And that's when I knew I was done with the poem in terms of revising that way. I like whittle down the language, switch things up here and there. But I think when I put that kind of like controversial statement, I didn't know him very well, but we did these things. Sure, it was great, but I was like very little. But then I think letting myself honor those memories and also be honest about how I felt, like in my present moment, that's when I knew the poem was finished. I was like, and I don't have to explain myself, right? Let me explain it to you by just not, right? And instead the whole image thing, right? And the sound at the end. But the reason I end with poem, the word, is because I felt like that was just like the most accurate way I could answer that question for myself. But yeah, so this was a poem in terms of like, I had to like say more than I was trying to. That's probably why it took so long, because I wasn't ready to say it. I was like 20 when I first tried to write it, and I'm 31. So it took time, but I'm glad I waited. Yeah. I like this poem. As soon as I said that, I was like, I don't like this poem. But thank you for asking. Yeah. Yes, in the back.
There are particular poets who were in conversation.
Oh, I like how you asked in conversation with instead of like, who do I like? And because now I can't even think. So I was like, that's a good way to put a question. I was really obsessed with Suji Kwak Kim's Notes from a Divided Country, because I really liked how I think she's really good at like straddling narrative and lyric in terms of time. And I don't think she has a poem about like a community garden somewhere. And it's like, it's a narrative poem, but it's not about like a one moment. And I really liked how she was speaking to that, because I read that book, when I was an undergrad. And I remember wondering like, how does she do that? And I feel like these poems are just me still wondering how she did that. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I think probably, that one the most. And just as like a little pitch, I really love the poet Gabrielle Cavacaresi. Their first book, The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart. If you want to procrastinate on your other classes, you should get it from the library. But for me, they're just like a master storyteller in terms of narrative, and it's so crisp. And I was like, I just want to write a couplet like that one day. Yeah, those two people, I would say. Yes. Do we have more time? I don't.
Time for one more question.
Gosh, no pressure. Or more, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Indigo, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I'm actually fearful of something like that, I just don't put it on the page. Or I think for me, there are poems and ideas that are just for me for now. And then there are poems I think is like personal but acceptable for public, right, consumption, really. And I think the thing I felt most, I don't know, there are like, when I think about like everyone asks like, oh, what are you working on next? And talked about this in that class, and I was like, nothing, right? So I kind of make stuff up. But I mean, that was my way of skirting around the fact that I really want, should I say I'm working on in my head. I really want to do an essay collection about like immigrant churches in the Midwest. Because I went to one, they're so weird. It's like whole like retreats and like systems, and you would never know because most of those people, they either stay in it or it's embarrassing, you never talk about it again. And not many people become writers. I mean, I think that's embarrassing, and I would be very fearful of other people coming in contact with my thoughts about it. So I'm stalling on that one. And other things that I don't know. I think once you mull over a poem or like a topic you really want to write about, but you're like a little scared of it, seriously, it just needs time. And so I'm like, there are some ghost poems in here. Like I grew up very fearful of ghosts. I'm like, it's demons, And so I start obsessively thinking about it. I like meditate over these ghosts. It was in Milwaukee. It was my first time ever living without a roommate. And then I lived in a studio apartment. There were no rooms, but I would really freak myself out at night. So I would just like stay up. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I'm like, why would these ghosts be here? Maybe they're lonely like me, And you would just like humanize it and like think about it from different angles until I found a place I was really comfortable with. And I was like, oh, it's fine. It's chill. I can go to sleep now. And so for me, I think poems in topics I'm scared to write about, I just keep turning them over and over and over until you find the one part you want to show. Because one poem, one essay, one book, you can't possibly cover it all. So I think it's a matter of being comfortable with one aspect of it eventually. Like if you really want to write about it, you should probably write about it. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Or do you like when you're thinking about it as a resident, of how it will sound out loud more, or is your mind more focused on space?
Yeah, like for an audience, or if it's just for myself.
Yeah, like art class concerned with like form on the page, like how it looks on the page.
Oh, I see. Okay. No, that's a great question. I think I'm usually more concerned with how it sounds first, because if you know how you want it to sound, then the form will come to you. You know what it should look like, or you'll have a feel for it, right? Yeah, that's not a very satisfying answer, is it? But yeah, I would say, I want it to sound a certain way. I've been trying to think about ways to write that's not me being comfortable. Because like we can all whip out like good boringy poems in the way that we're really comfortable writing. And I think when I wrote the poems in this book, those poems were poems I thought I was pushing myself, right? But now if I wrote poems like this, it would feel really stagnant to me, because luckily I feel like I've grown past that, or at least in terms of my own like standards for myself. But for everyone, it looks very different. Yeah, I think when you have a good poem, perhaps sound and form will come together at once, and then you don't need to worry about it. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, but I'll tell you, I fiddle with the form so much, I was like, oh, F it, like couplets, here you are. Because I just could not get it. Oh, now I don't even want to think about it. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We don't.
Well, this is a good ending question. Currently, what's your favorite one in here?
Oh my.
Right.
Like, can I say two, or do you want just one?
Sure.
Yeah. I would say honestly the last poem I read, Another Door to the Moon, because that's a poem that I wrote. All my friends were publishing books. We got really lucky at the same time. And those friends were like writing like 20 more poems to fit in it. I was like, I'm trying to like fill like a few more pages. And so they were all doing it during the pandemic. I was like, oh crap, I'll write one. And that was my most recent one. So I really liked that because I felt like it was most in my head. And I knew it wouldn't make sense to like 80% of the people or maybe more reading it. But I was like, this one's for me. And I really like how I ended there for myself. Actually, that's a great place to end. Yeah, that's my favorite. Thank you. Thank you all so much.